Hello class. Today we're going to have a mini lesson on the sixth and final comprehension skill, and it is the skill of synthesizing. Now synthesizing, what the heck is that, Mr. Royans? But before, I don't want to get ahead of myself. So as we start today's mini lesson, let me first remind you of the voices in your head, a reader's head. We've learned about using our reading voice to sound out the words, right? Reading voice is the voice. It's just the words when we read them. That's how it sounds in our head. But we've also got to make sure the other voice in our head is talking to that voice that it's talking to, and that's the thinking voice. And it can have a lot of different thoughts, right? So far, we've gone over how the thinking voice can retell and summarize. We have talked about how it determines the most important information, the main idea. We talked about how it can also see things in our mind because we can visualize. We can, even when there's no pictures, we can visualize, right? Remember when we learned all these guys. These are all mini lessons that we had. If you need refreshers, go back to my YouTube channel and watch them. We learned to start asking questions when we read and even make connections, all using our thinking voice. And today I want to introduce you to that sixth and final skill, the skill of synthesizing. It's the sixth comprehension strategy. Now, synthesis is awesome because it's powerful. But to really understand its power, I want to quickly review how the other inferences or types of thoughts work. So when we read a few lines, then we have a thought. We read a few more lines and have another thought. And we keep this reading voice, thinking voice, the back and forth like we talked about, reading voice, thinking voice. We hit read, have a thought, read, have a thought. And we keep this conversation going all throughout the text. But every once in a while, we read something, we have a thought. And then another thought. And then another thought. And we keep thinking about what we just read. We can't stop thinking about it. And if we've had multiple thoughts, we realize something. We've learned something. We've discovered something we didn't know before. And when that happens, it's synthesis. A synthesis is a lot like baking a cake. How many of you ever made cake before? Made cake with mom or dad or grandma, grandpa? When you first buy a cake mix, you open it up and pour the powder into the bowl. You don't have much. You start with powder until you add the other ingredients. You add the water, and then the oil, and then the eggs. After adding those ingredients and mixing them up and putting them in the oven, you form a cake. The whole cake baking process is exactly how synthesizing works for readers. The powdered cake mix is your text. And you open it up and you pour some in the bowl. That's you reading and having a thought about what you read. And then you read a little more and you think about it. And you read a little more and think about it. Then once in a while you read something and you think more than just a moment about it. You are thinking about it. It makes you wonder. It reminds you of texts you've read, experience you've had. It reminds you of things you've learned previously and what experts say or other perspectives on this topic. It makes you start to think about nagging questions. Excuse me. It makes you start to wonder or get curious about things, about the topic. You might even think about what's going on in the setting, what was happening in that time period, depending on when the text might take place. We're considering everything about the text, including our own emotions. What were we thinking about? What were we wondering? What are we thinking? What are we wondering? How are we feeling? And then we put any of these extra thoughts into our first thought. We start to mix it and combine it, like mixing a cake, and really consider it. And what we have when we're done is a brand new thought, the synthesis. So our initial thought is the cake powder. We're reading it. We're reading that powder, blah. We start thinking about it. That's adding eggs. So we have another thought about it. We add oil. Then we have another thought about it. That's adding the water. Then we start mixing all those ideas together, let it cook in our head for a little bit, and boom, we've learned something, had a new thought. But it's easy for me to sit here and talk about, compare it to baking a cake. So what I want to do now is I want to show you the difference between synthesis and the other 5 inferences. But instead of using a textbook, I want to use photos. So the next part of this video is I'm going to go through a slideshow and talk about these photos and show you the difference between all the different inference skills. Okay, class, this is our further discussion about synthesizing ideas, and this is synthesizing using pictures. And I'm going to go through the pictures, and I'm going to use all of the other inference skills we've talked about. Now remember, I talked about how text can be something different besides just a book. So I want you to see how I'm using these inference skills applied to photos. Okay? Picture number 1. Oh, it's a picture of my favorite dog, Luke. My favorite dog of all time. He was a basset hound. He was the most adorable boy I ever had. And seeing this picture instantly sends me into retell mode, where I think about how I got him, and he was just a puppy, and he was whiny and adorable. Then he grew into this wonderful, lovable dog that he lived for a good 15 solid years, and then he passed away. And I just had such joy with him, and such love of an animal in my life. And I look at a second picture, and it's me and my mom. This is from 2016. We went down to visit my aunt and uncle down in Florida. Now, I could go into retell mode about the whole trip, but I want to visualize. And if I could just show you guys the visuals in my head, you would think of the beautiful sunsets and the ocean and the boat rides and all those great things. And there's a connection right here when I see this photo. It's my mom and dad, and that's us at my graduation. And I'm connecting to the emotion of that's a text to self. Even though it's not a book, it's still a text to self emotion. It's connecting to a photo at a time where such joy was felt, because I finally graduated college, and I waited a while to go to college. And the story of my life is I kind of waited to get around to a lot of things, and there's just such joy, and my parents are proud of me, proud of myself. And then there's this last pic, and I see it, and it's me with my daughter Lucy. She's 2, and I could go into I start to go into retell mode when I see this, but there's so much to this photo, so much more than just what you see there. There's setting. We go to a coffee shop once a week for breakfast on the weekends. My wife and Lucy and I, and there's such joy in this photo, because the joy that I feel in having a daughter, the joy that my daughter is having while being with her parents. And I start thinking about the background, a text-to-self connection of the background of, how important my parents were to me, and how much my parents meant to me, and how much I want to mean to my daughter, and how much I'm sure your parents or your guardians may mean to all of you. And then I kind of look at it from another perspective, and I realize a lot of people, they're kind of like, oh, wow, you're a little older when you had a child, because I was 37 when I had her. That's a little old. By the time she's 10, I'll be 47, almost 50. And a lot of people may think that's kind of sad because I'll be so much older, but it's still joyful no matter what. To me, and I stop and I think about their perspective, and I go, you know what? No, it's still joyful no matter what, no matter how old you are. So, and it's just looking at a photo. even brings that back. So did you see it? Did you see what happened there? I had a synthesis while looking at the photo. Did you notice how I looked at the picture and I had an initial thought? But then I paused and another thought came, and then another, and then another. I don't know how my thoughts were going to come, but after I paused and had several thoughts, I paused once more. That was me combining, mixing my thinking. It's when that's when I realized that for me, it wasn't so sad that I was older when I had a child. You know, a lot of people don't have kids ever in this world. I never thought I would, but I ended up having one, and it doesn't matter what age. In fact, it's kind of made it extra special to me. That was my synthesis. I had to stop. I hadn't stopped to think about that before to looking at that picture. I had this new realization after reading, looking at that photo, and taking into account all of my thoughts. So today's lesson was all about synthesizing. It's the sixth type of reader thought. The thinking voice can synthesize. And it's this powerful inference that your mind can make by simply reading the text and thinking, adding, combining, mixing, and producing a brand new realization. When you synthesize, you learn something you didn't consider before.